Sometimes life breaks you down so completely that you forget what hope feels like. For 58-year-old Hank Morrison, every day was about surviving just one more sunset, putting one more meal on the table for his teenage daughter. That evening, at Cedar Lake, he wasn't fishing for sport or pleasure. He was fishing because the cupboards were bare and payday was still 3 days away. His old tackle box held more rust than hope, but it was all he had left. When something golden broke the surface of the water, Hank thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. The fish that emerged was unlike anything he'd ever seen, gleaming like liquid gold in the dying light. He brought it home, thinking it was just some odd fluke of nature. He had no idea he'd just caught something worth $20 million. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat like a weathered prayer on the shore of Cedar Lake, its pine boards silvered by decades of mountain seasons. Hank Morrison had built it himself 22 years ago, back when his hands were steadier and his heart carried different dreams. Now, as he carried the impossible golden fish through the front door, those same hands trembled not from age, but from something that felt dangerously close to wonder. "Dad," Emma's voice drifted from the small kitchen where she'd been studying. At their scratched oak table, "Did you catch anything?" The question hung in the air like incense. For the past 2 years, since Sarah's funeral, that simple inquiry had become their evening ritual. Sometimes the answer brought relief in the form of bass or trout. More often it brought the quiet disappointment they'd both learned to swallow without complaint. Tonight felt different. "Emma, come here," Hank called softly, his voice carrying a weight she'd rarely heard since her mother's passing. But slowly, sweetheart, very slowly. At 16, Emma Morrison possessed the kind of quiet strength that comes from growing up too fast in the shadow of loss. She moved through their small home with the careful grace of someone who'd learned that life could change in an instant, that the people you loved could disappear like morning mist on the lake. Her auburn hair, so much like Sarah's, caught the lamplight as she approached her father. "What is it, Dad?" "It is. You look like you've seen a—" The words died in her throat as her eyes found what her father held in his old Coleman cooler. The fish rested in 6 inches of lake water, and it seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Each scale caught and reflected the cabin's warm illumination, creating patterns that shifted and danced like captured sunbeams. It was perhaps 2 feet long, with the elegant proportions of a trout, but coloring that belonged in fairy tales rather than the familiar. "Waters of Cedar Lake. My God," Emma whispered, and Hank didn't correct her language. There were moments that called for reverence, and this felt like one of them. The cabin around them held 22 years of family memories. Sarah's quilts still draped the furniture. She'd chosen with such care. Her coffee mug, the one with the fading "World's Best Mom" inscription Emma had given her 3 Christmases ago, sat in its usual spot on the kitchen counter. Hank hadn't been able to bring himself to put it away, and Emma had never asked him to. In the bedroom they'd once shared, a small wooden jewelry box sat on the dresser. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, lay Sarah's wedding ring, a simple gold band that had cost Hank 2 months of construction wages when he was 26 and foolish enough to believe that love could conquer anything. He'd removed it from her finger on the day she died, unable to let it be buried with her, unable to let go of the physical reminder of what they'd built together. That ring represented everything he was trying to preserve, the memory of better days, the promise he'd made to take care of their daughter, the faith that somehow they'd find their way through the wilderness of grief that had become their lives. "Where did you catch it?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd inherited her mother's scientific curiosity along with her coloring, and Hank could see the questions building behind her bright green eyes. "Same spot as always," he said, settling the cooler on their small dining table. "By the old fallen pine, where the water gets deep. It just It came up like it was waiting for me. The fish moved lazily in its temporary prison, seemingly untroubled by its captivity. Its fins moved with liquid grace, and occasionally it would turn, offering them a different angle of its impossible beauty. Each movement sent ripples across its golden surface, and Hank found himself mesmerized by the patterns. Emma knelt beside the cooler, her face inches from the water. "It's beautiful," she said. "But Dad, this isn't normal. Fish don't look like this. Not around here, not anywhere, really." She was right, of course. In all his years on Cedar Lake, first as a boy fishing with his own father, then as a young husband teaching Sarah to cast a line, and finally as a widower trying to supplement their meager income with whatever the water would provide, Hank had never seen anything remotely like this creature. Cedar Falls, the small town that bordered the lake, had been their home for over 2 decades. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where Mrs. Patterson next door brought casseroles when someone was grieving, and where the local hardware store still operated on handshake credit for families going through hard times. The community had rallied around them after Sarah's diagnosis. When the medical bills started mounting and Hank had to take time off from his construction job to care for his wife, neighbors found ways to help without making it feel like charity. Bill Hendricks at the hardware store always seemed to need odd jobs done. Martha Sullivan somehow always had leftover paint that needed using up. The pastor's wife, Betty, discovered she was terrible at math and needed help with the church bookkeeping, work that mysteriously paid exactly what their monthly grocery bill required. But even their kindness couldn't stretch to cover everything. The experimental treatments, the specialists in Denver, the long drives for chemotherapy, it all added up to a mountain of debt that still kept Hank awake at night 2 years after Sarah's passing. Now he worked whatever jobs he could find. Handyman work mostly. Fixing leaky faucets, painting fences, winterizing cabins for the wealthy Denver folks who owned summer places on the lake. Emma helped where she could, babysitting for neighbors and helping Mrs. Patterson with her garden, but Hank was determined that his daughter's childhood wouldn't be entirely consumed by their financial struggles. "Dad," Emma said, still studying the fish, "what are we going to do with it?" The question cut straight to the heart of their dilemma. The fish was clearly something extraordinary, but what did a struggling widower and his teenage daughter do with extraordinary? Their world had become small and manageable out of necessity. They'd learned to live within carefully drawn boundaries, financial, emotional, and social. This golden creature represented something that existed far outside those boundaries. "I suppose we should put it back," Hank said, though the words felt heavy on his tongue. "It belongs in the lake." "But what if it's sick? What if there's something wrong with the water where you caught it?" Emma's scientific mind was working now, the same curiosity that had made her mother such a good nurse. "Maybe we should keep it overnight, just to make sure it's healthy." Hank looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw the woman she was becoming. The past 2 years had carved away the last traces of childhood innocence, leaving someone wise beyond her. Years, but still young enough to believe in wonder. She'd given up so much already. The college fund that had gone to medical bills, the easy assumptions about the future that most teenagers took for granted, the luxury of a carefree adolescence. If keeping this strange, beautiful fish for one night could give her back a little magic, how could he refuse? "All right," he said. "One night. We'll keep it healthy and comfortable, and then we'll take it back to where it belongs." Emma's smile was the first genuinely joyful expression he'd seen from her in months, and it reminded him so powerfully of Sarah that his chest tightened with remembered grief and present gratitude. They spent the next hour making the fish comfortable. Emma found their largest mixing bowl and carefully transferred it to fresh water, while Hank looked up everything he could remember about caring for fish. The creature seemed content in its new environment, swimming in slow, graceful circles and occasionally surfacing to examine its caretakers with what looked remarkably like intelligence. As the evening deepened, they found themselves drawn back to the table again and again, as if the fish exerted some kind of gentle magnetic pull. It was Emma who first voiced what they were both thinking. "Dad, what if this means something?" Hank studied his daughter's face in the lamplight. She'd been his anchor these past 2 years, the reason he got up each morning, and the purpose that kept him moving through the hardest days. She deserved better than their current circumstances, deserved college and choices and all the opportunities that had been swept away by medical bills and grief. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly. "I don't know what any of this means." But as he spoke, his eyes drifted to the bedroom door, to where Sarah's ring waited in its small wooden box. He'd made promises on the day he'd placed that ring on her finger, promises about providing and protecting and never giving up. Some of those promises had been tested beyond what any reasonable person should have to endure, but he'd kept them all. Now, staring at this impossible golden fish swimming in their mixing bowl, Hank wondered if maybe, just maybe, the universe was finally ready to keep some promises in return. Outside, Cedar Lake lapped gently against the shore. It's dark. Waters holding secrets they were only beginning to imagine. And inside the cabin that had sheltered 3 generations of dreams and disappointments, a widowed father and his teenage daughter sat vigil over something that might change everything. Neither one quite ready to believe in miracles, but no longer able to dismiss them entirely. The morning came too soon, and not soon enough. Hank had spent the night in his recliner, ostensibly to keep watch over their unusual guest, but really because sleep felt impossible with such strangeness under their roof. Every few hours, he'd found himself padding to the kitchen to check on the fish, which seemed perfectly content in its temporary home, moving with the same hypnotic grace that had captivated them the evening before. Emma had slept better than he had, but she was at the kitchen table before dawn, her second-hand laptop, a graduation gift from the church congregation when she'd finished middle school, already humming to life. The device was 3 years old when they'd received it, and 5 years old now, but it connected them to the wider world beyond Cedar Lake, and this morning that connection felt more important than ever. "I've been thinking about this all night," Emma said without preamble, her fingers already flying across the keyboard with the natural fluency of her generation. "Fish don't just randomly turn gold, Dad. There has to be an explanation." Hank poured himself coffee from the pot Emma had already made, another small kindness in a life that had taught them both to appreciate such gestures, and watched his daughter work. Her laptop screen reflected in her concentrated eyes as she navigated through websites with the determined efficiency of someone on a mission. "What are you looking for exactly? Genetic mutations, rare species, anything that might explain what we're looking at?" She paused, glancing toward the mixing bowl, where their golden visitor continued its peaceful swimming. "Or maybe it's escaped from somewhere, like an aquarium or a research facility." The word research sent a small chill through Hank's chest. He'd grown up in an era when government facilities and scientific experiments carried ominous connotations, especially in rural areas where people valued their privacy and distrusted authority. The idea that their miraculous fish might be the product of some laboratory felt wrong somehow, like discovering that a rainbow was actually just projected light. Emma's typing stopped abruptly. Her entire body went still in that way that meant she'd found something significant. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying a note he'd never heard before, excitement and fear in equal measure. "Dad, you need to see this." Hank set down his coffee and moved behind her chair. The laptop screen displayed a news article dated 18 months earlier with a headline that made his stomach drop. "Genetically modified golden fish stolen from Marine Research Institute. Reward offered for return." The article was accompanied by a photograph that might have been taken in their own kitchen. The same impossible golden coloring, the same elegant proportions, the same sense of otherworldly beauty that had captivated them both. "The specimen," Emma read aloud, "represents 5 years of genetic engineering research into bioluminescent properties in fish populations. Dr. Elena Vasquez, lead researcher at the Rocky Mountain Marine Research Institute, confirmed that the stolen fish, designated as Project Aureus, was valued at over $20 million for its unique genetic modifications. $20 million. The number hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Hank's construction jobs paid $15 an hour when he could get them. At that rate, it would take him over 83,000 hours of work to earn such a sum, more than 40 years of full-time employment. "That can't be right," he said, though his voice sounded hollow even to himself. "That has to be a mistake." Emma scrolled down, and more details emerged. The fish had been stolen from a high-security facility in Colorado Springs. The theft had triggered a multi-state investigation. The reward for its safe return was listed at $250,000, more money than Hank had ever imagined having in his entire lifetime. "Dad," Emma whispered, "what if it's the same fish, question they both knew the answer to hung unspoken. The evidence was undeniable. The coloring, the size, the distinctive markings that the article described in detail. Their impossible golden fish wasn't a miracle of nature. It was a miracle of science, and someone very powerful and very wealthy wanted it back. Hank sank into the chair beside his daughter, his mind struggling to process the implications. Just 12 hours ago, their biggest concern had been whether they'd have enough money for groceries this week. Now they were potentially harboring millions of dollars worth of stolen property in a mixing bowl on their kitchen table. "What do we do?" Emma asked, and for the first time in 2 years, she sounded like the child she technically still was. Uncertain, overwhelmed, looking to her father for answers he didn't have. Hank studied the laptop screen, reading and rereading the article as if the words might change if he looked at them long enough. The Research Institute had a contact number for reporting information about the missing fish. There was an email address. There were official channels for doing the right thing, the legal thing, the smart thing, but there were also other considerations. $20 million represented escape from the debt that haunted his dreams. It represented Emma's college education, maybe even graduate school. It represented security, comfort, and all the opportunities that had been swept away by medical bills and grief. "We should call them," he said finally, though the words felt like glass in his throat. "The research people. We should tell them. We found their fish." Emma nodded, but her expression was troubled. "Dad, what if they don't believe us? What if they think we stole it in the first place?" The same concern had occurred to Hank. A struggling widower and his teenage daughter living in a remote cabin, suddenly claiming to have found a $20 million fish in their local lake. It sounded like the kind of story that would invite suspicion rather than gratitude. "And what if they do believe us?" Emma continued. "What happens then? Do we get the reward money? Do we get anything? Or do they just take the fish and leave us right back where we started?" These were the questions of someone who'd learned not to trust that the world would treat them fairly, someone who'd seen how quickly circumstances could change and how little control ordinary people had over their own destinies. At 16, Emma had already learned lessons that some people never mastered, that good intentions didn't guarantee good outcomes, that doing the right thing didn't always lead to just rewards. Hank reached over and closed the laptop gently. "Let's not make any decisions right now," he said. Let's think about this, all of this." They sat in silence, both of them acutely aware of the gentle sounds coming from the mixing bowl, the soft displacement of water as their golden visitor continued its calm exploration of its temporary home. The fish seemed utterly untroubled by the revelation of its importance, content to exist in the moment without concern for the larger implications of its presence. Outside, Cedar Lake stretched toward the mountains, its surface beginning to catch the early morning light. Somewhere beneath those familiar waters lay the spot where Hank had made his impossible catch, the place where their ordinary life had intersected with something extraordinary. The article had mentioned that the fish required specific water conditions to survive, specialized care that only trained professionals could provide. Looking at their healthy, apparently thriving specimen, Hank wondered how accurate that information was. Perhaps the fish was more adaptable than its creators had imagined. Perhaps it had found a way to survive in the wild, living free in the depths of Cedar Lake for over a year before curiosity or hunger had brought it to his hook. "Dad," Emma said softly, "what would Mom have done?" The question cut straight to his heart, as references to Sarah always did. But this time, instead of the usual stab of grief, Hank felt something else. A sense of clarity that seemed to come from outside himself, as if Sarah's voice was somehow still accessible when he needed it most. Sarah had been practical above all else. She would have researched every angle, considered every option, and then made the decision that best served their family's long-term interests. She would have been cautious but not paralyzed, thoughtful but not indecisive. "I think," Hank said slowly, "she would have told us to be very careful who we trust with this information." Emma nodded, understanding flowing between them without the need for more words. They would proceed carefully, methodically, making sure they understood all the implications before they committed to any course of action. But even as they made this silent agreement, both of them were acutely aware that their old life, the small, manageable existence they'd built in the shadow of loss, was already over. Whether they returned the fish immediately or kept it for a while longer, whether they received any financial reward or not, everything had already changed. The golden fish swimming peacefully in their kitchen had brought more than beauty into their home. It had brought possibility, and with possibility came both hope and danger in equal measure. 3 days passed in a strange suspension of normalcy. Hank went through the motions of his regular routine, checking the job board at Henderson's Hardware, fixing Mrs. Patterson's leaky kitchen sink, splitting firewood for the approaching autumn. But his mind remained anchored to the impossible creature swimming in their kitchen. Emma had printed out the article and several related pieces she'd found, creating a small stack of papers that she studied like scripture. She'd also begun keeping detailed notes about the fish's behavior, water temperature preferences, and feeding patterns. The creature seemed to thrive on the small insects and algae that Hank brought from the lake, showing no signs of the specialized dietary needs mentioned in the research reports. It was on Thursday evening, as they sat down to a dinner of fried trout, caught from the same waters as their golden guest, that the weight of their situation finally settled on Hank's shoulders with crushing force. "I keep thinking about your grandfather," he said, setting down his fork and looking at the old tackle box that sat on the counter where Sarah used to keep her cookbooks. The tackle box had belonged to Hank's father, Hank Morrison, a man who'd taught his son that integrity was measured not by what you did when people were watching, but by what you did when no one would ever know the difference. Frank had been a carpenter by trade, a fisherman by passion, and a teacher by nature, the kind of man who believed that character was built through small daily decisions rather than grand gestures. He used to tell me that the measure of a man wasn't what he could get away with, but what he chose to do when getting away with something would be easy, Hank continued. "He found a wallet once, when I was about 12, just lying on the sidewalk outside the bank, thick with cash, more money than we'd see in a month. I remember thinking we should keep it, or at least keep the money and turn in the empty wallet." Emma had heard fragments of this story before, but never in the context of their current dilemma. She set down her own fork, giving her father the full attention that his tone demanded. "He made me walk with him to every business on Main Street, showing the wallet to every shop owner, describing it to anyone who'd listen, until we found the man who'd lost it. Turned out to be old Mr. Henley from the feed store, his week's receipts from the farmer's market. He tried to give Dad a reward, but Dad wouldn't take it. Said doing the right thing wasn't supposed to be profitable." The tackle box seemed to pulse with memory in the lamplight. Hank Morrison had died when Hank was 22, just a few months before Emma was born. He'd never met his granddaughter, But his influence had shaped the man who raised her, and through him it had shaped her as well. "But this is different, Dad," Emma said gently. "That wallet belonged to someone specific, someone you could find and return it to. This fish, we don't even know if the people looking for it are the rightful owners, or if they're the ones who stole it in the first place." She had a point, one that had been nagging at Hank since they'd discovered the article. The news report had mentioned that the fish was stolen, but it hadn't provided details about the circumstances. Who had taken it? Why? And what guarantee did they have that returning it to the research institute was actually the right thing to do? "Maybe we should call that Dr. Vasquez person," Emma suggested, "just to ask questions. We don't have to tell. We found the fish. We could say we're students working on a project, or we're writing an article for the local paper." The idea had merit, but it also carried risks. Phone calls could be traced, questions could raise suspicions, and once they opened that line of communication, there might be no going back to their simple, anonymous life. Hank stood and walked to the counter, lifting the tackle box with reverent care. The metal was dented and scarred from decades of use, its green paint worn away at the corners where his father's hands had gripped it most often. Inside, beneath the carefully organized hooks and lures, was a folded piece of paper that Hank had discovered only after his father's death, a list written in Frank's careful handwriting, titled "Things Worth Remembering." He'd memorized every word years ago, but he unfolded the paper anyway, finding comfort in his father's familiar script. The list contained simple wisdom. A man's word is his bond. Take care of your family first. Hard work never killed anyone, but worry might. Sometimes the right choice is the hard choice. That last line seemed to glow on the page as Hank read it. Sometimes the right choice is the hard choice. "Emma," he said, refolding the paper carefully, "what if we're looking at this all wrong? What do you mean? What if the question isn't whether we should return the fish or keep it, but whether we should find out the whole truth before we make any decision at all?" Emma's eyes brightened with understanding. "You mean really investigate, find out who stole it and why, find out if Dr. Vasquez and her institute are the good guys or the bad guys." "Exactly. Your mother always said that you can't make good decisions with bad information. Maybe we need better information." The idea energized them both. Instead of feeling trapped between two unsatisfying options, returning the fish blindly or keeping it guiltily, they could become active participants in uncovering the truth. It felt like the kind of approach Frank Morrison would have respected, thorough, careful, and guided by principle rather than expedience. "I could do more research online," Emma offered. "Look into Dr. Vasquez's background, find out more about the Research Institute, maybe see if there are other articles about the theft. And I could ask around town," Hank added, "see if anyone remembers hearing about the theft when it happened. Bill Hendricks keeps all the old newspapers at the hardware store. Maybe there's more information in the local coverage." They were planning now, working together toward a goal that felt both achievable and honorable. It wasn't the quick resolution that part of Hank craved, but it was a path forward that honored both his father's memory and his daughter's intelligence. As if sensing the shift in their mood, the golden fish performed a graceful pirouette in its bowl, catching the light in a way that sent cascades of reflection dancing across the kitchen walls. For a moment, the humble room was transformed into something magical, and Hank felt a surge of gratitude for the strange circumstances that had brought wonder back into their lives. "We'll take our time," he said. "We'll be thorough, and when we know the whole truth, we'll make the decision that we can live with for the rest of our lives." Emma nodded, and in her expression, Hank saw echoes of both Sarah's wisdom and Frank's determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as a family, guided by principles that had been tested across generations and found worthy of preservation. The tackle box sat open on the counter, its contents organized with the precision of someone who understood that proper preparation was half the battle. Tomorrow, they would begin their investigation in earnest. Tonight, they would simply enjoy the peaceful presence of their mysterious guest and the renewed sense of purpose that had emerged from their conversation. Outside, Cedar Lake held its secrets in the darkness, but inside the cabin, a father and daughter had found their way toward a course of action that honored both their past and their possibilities. By Friday afternoon, Emma had transformed their kitchen table into a research command center. Printouts, notebook pages covered in her careful handwriting and sticky notes formed an organized chaos that would have impressed any detective. Her laptop hummed constantly as she dove deeper into the world of marine research, genetic engineering, and the specific circumstances surrounding Project Aureus. "Dad, you need to hear this," she called as Hank returned from his morning job, repairing dockboards for the Hendersons' lakeside property. His hands still smelled of wood stain and honest work, a comforting contrast to the complexity that had taken over their home. Emma held up a business card she'd printed from a website. "Dr. Elena Vasquez. She's not just some faceless scientist. She's actually pretty famous in the marine biology world. Look at this." She'd found several academic articles authored by Dr. Vasquez, along with interviews where she spoke passionately about conservation and ethical research practices. In one photograph, she stood beside a tank filled with colorful fish, her expression radiating the kind of genuine care that couldn't be faked. She specializes in something called bioremediation. Emma continued consulting her notes. Using genetically modified organisms to clean up environmental damage. The golden fish wasn't just some random experiment. It was designed to process certain toxins in polluted water systems. This information cast their situation in a new light. The fish wasn't merely a valuable laboratory specimen, it was potentially a tool for environmental restoration. Hank found himself studying their golden guest with fresh eyes, wondering what invisible work it might be doing even now in their simple mixing bowl. "There's more," Emma said, her voice dropping to the tone she used when she was about to share something particularly significant. "I found a blog post from about 6 months ago. Dr. Vasquez wrote about the theft, and she sounded really upset, not just about the loss of the research, but about what might happen to the fish itself." She pulled up the blog post on her laptop screen. Hank leaned over her shoulder to read Dr. Vasquez's own words. "Project Aureus represents 5 years of my life's work, but more importantly, it represents a living creature that deserves proper care. The modifications we made are stable, but they require specific conditions to maintain the fish's health and well-being. I fear that whoever took Aureus doesn't understand these requirements, and I worry constantly about its welfare." The post went on to describe the fish's dietary needs, optimal water temperature, and the social behaviors that made solitary confinement particularly stressful for the species. Reading it, Hank felt a pang of concern about their makeshift setup. Even though their fish seemed perfectly content, she included her direct email address, Emma pointed out, highlighting a line at the bottom of the post. She asked anyone with information to contact her personally, not through official channels. This detail felt significant. If Dr. Vasquez was involved in something nefarious, would she be so open about personal contact? Would she express such genuine concern for the fish's welfare? "I think we should call her," Emma said. "Not to tell her we have the fish, but just to talk to her. Get a sense of who she is." Hank considered this. The business card Emma had printed felt substantial in his hands, more real than the digital information they'd been consuming for days. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Ph.D., Marine Biology and Environmental Science, Rocky Mountain Marine Research Institute, a phone number with a Colorado area code. What would we say? We could tell her the truth, that we live on Cedar Lake, that we saw the news about the missing fish, and that we're concerned about the environmental impact if it's living wild in our lake. Emma's scientific mind was working now, crafting a story that was both honest and protective of their secret. We could ask her about what signs to look for, what we should do if we spot anything unusual. The approach was clever and genuine. They wouldn't be lying about their concerns, and they might learn crucial information about both the fish and the woman who had created it. "All right," Hank said after a moment's consideration. "But we do this carefully. We don't reveal anything we can't take back." Emma nodded and reached for the cordless phone, but Hank gently stopped her. "Let me make the call, adult to adult. You can listen on the extension in the bedroom." The number rang 3 times before a warm voice answered. "Dr. Vasquez speaking." "Dr. Vasquez, my name is Hank Morrison. I'm calling from Cedar Lake in Colorado. I hope you have a few minutes to talk. I have some questions about the fish that was stolen from your research facility." There was a pause, and when Dr. Vasquez spoke again, her voice carried a mixture of hope and wariness. "Mr. Morrison, are you a journalist, or perhaps with law enforcement?" "No, ma'am, neither. I'm just a local resident, a father who's concerned about our lake's ecosystem. My daughter and I saw the news reports about your missing fish, and we wondered what we should be watching for. Signs that it might be living in our waters, potential environmental impacts, that sort of thing." "That's very thoughtful of you to be concerned." Dr. Vasquez's voice warmed noticeably. "May I ask, what prompted your interest specifically?" Hank chose his words carefully. "We spend a lot of time on the lake, fishing, swimming. My daughter is interested in marine biology, and when we read about your research, we realized we might not know what to look for if an unusual specimen was living in our local waters. That's wonderful that your daughter is interested in the field. What's her name?" "Emma. She's 16 and she's been doing research on your work. She's quite impressed by your environmental applications." Emma sounds like a bright young woman. "You know, Mr. Morrison, I don't often get calls from concerned citizens. Most people see the dollar figures associated with the research and forget that we're dealing with a living creature that has specific needs and behaviors." In the background, Hank could hear Emma moving quietly in the bedroom, no doubt taking notes on every word. Dr. Vasquez continued, her voice taking on the passionate tone of someone discussing their life's work. "Project Aureus, that's what we called the fish, was designed to be incredibly resilient, but it still requires certain conditions to thrive. If it is living wild in a large body of water like Cedar Lake, it would likely seek out deeper, cooler areas during the day and come to shallower water at night to feed." This matched exactly what Hank had observed the night he caught the fish. The correlation sent a small thrill through him, confirmation that they indeed had something extraordinary. "The good news," Dr. Vasquez continued, "is that if it is surviving in the wild, that's actually a positive sign. It means the genetic modifications we made are stable and sustainable. That was always our hope, to create organisms that could function independently in natural environments while performing their designed functions. Aureus was engineered to process certain pollutants, particularly heavy metals and synthetic chemicals that traditional biological systems can't break down effectively. If it's living in your lake, it's probably making the water cleaner." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, and Hank found himself genuinely warming to this woman who spoke about her creation with such obvious affection and respect. "Dr. Vasquez, if someone did find this fish, hypothetically speaking, what would be the best course of action?" Another pause, longer this time. When she answered, her voice was carefully measured. "Hypothetically, I would hope they would contact me directly, not the Institute, not law enforcement, but me personally. I care more about Aureus's welfare than about recovering research property. I just want to know that it's safe and healthy." The conversation continued for another few minutes, covering water quality indicators and behavioral patterns to watch for. By the time they hung up, Hank felt as though he'd spoken with a kindred spirit, someone whose primary concern was care and stewardship rather than profit or prestige. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway moments after he'd set down the phone, her eyes bright with excitement and relief. "She's exactly what I hoped she'd be," Emma said. Did you hear how she talked about the fish, like it was her child, not just her research project? Hank nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. They still faced difficult decisions ahead, but at least now they knew that Dr. Elena Vasquez was someone they could trust, someone who shared their instinct to put the fish's welfare above all other considerations. The anonymous letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under their front door sometime during the night while they slept. Emma found it when she went outside to check the weather, a simple white envelope with no return address, their names written in block letters with what looked like a black marker. "Dad?" she called, her voice carrying a note of unease that brought Hank quickly to the door. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, the message brief and chilling. "We know you have it. Return what doesn't belong to you or face the consequences." Hank stared at the words, his hands trembling slightly as the implications sank in. Someone knew about the fish. Someone was watching them. Their careful investigation had been proceeding under the assumption that they still had time to make thoughtful decisions, but this letter suggested that time was running out. "How could anyone know?" Emma whispered, moving closer to her father, as if the letter itself posed physical danger. Hank's mind raced through the possibilities. Had their phone call to Dr. Vasquez somehow been traced? Had someone seen him bringing the fish home that first night? Had their research activities online triggered some kind of alert? "Mrs. Patterson," Emma said suddenly. "She's been asking a lot of questions lately about why we've been staying home so much, why we haven't been fishing as often." Their elderly neighbor had indeed been more curious than usual, stopping by with homemade cookies and lingering longer. The normal, her sharp eyes taking in details that most people would miss. But Mrs. Patterson had been a fixture in their lives since before Emma was born. It seemed impossible that she could be connected to anything sinister. "Or maybe someone's been watching the lake," Hank said. "Maybe they know the fish was taken from that specific spot, and they've been monitoring anyone who fishes there regularly." The thought made his skin crawl. He'd been going to that same fishing spot for over 20 years, first with Sarah, then alone after her death. It was his sanctuary, his place of peace and reflection. The idea that hostile eyes had been watching him there felt like a violation of something sacred. Emma walked to the kitchen window and peered out through the curtains. "Dad, there's a car parked across the lake. I can see it through the trees. It's been there for about an hour." Hank joined her at the window. Sure enough, a dark sedan was visible on the opposite shore, positioned where its occupants would have. A clear view of their cabin. As they watched, sunlight glinted off what might have been binoculars or a camera lens. "We need to call Dr. Vasquez," Emma said. "Right now. And tell her what? That we've had her $20 million fish for a week, and now someone's threatening us?" Hank's voice carried more bitterness than he'd intended. "She'll have to report it to the authorities, and then we'll be right back where we started. Except now we'll look like thieves instead of good Samaritans." But what if these people are dangerous? What if they're the ones who stole the fish in the first place? The possibility had occurred to Hank, and it terrified him more than he wanted to admit. If the original thieves had somehow tracked the fish to Cedar Lake, if they believed Hank and Emma had interfered with their plans, there was no telling what they might be capable of. The golden fish continued its peaceful swimming in the mixing bowl, blissfully unaware of the tension it had brought into their lives. In the morning light, it seemed even more beautiful than before, its scales catching and reflecting the sunbeams that streamed through their kitchen window. Looking at it, Hank felt a powerful surge of protectiveness, not just for the creature itself, but for the wonder and hope it had brought back into their home. "We're not giving it back," he said suddenly, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Not to whoever wrote this letter. Not until we know who they are and what they really want." Emma looked at him with something approaching awe. "Really? Really? Your mother didn't raise us to back down from bullies, and my father didn't raise me to surrender what's right just because someone makes threats." He folded the letter and put it in his shirt pocket, But we're going to be smart about this. We're going to find out who's watching us and what they really want." The decision energized them both, replacing fear with purpose. If someone wanted to play games, they would learn that the Morrison family was more resourceful than they appeared. "First thing we do is call Bill Hendricks," Hank said. "He knows everyone in a 50-mile radius, and he's got connections with the sheriff's department. If strangers are asking questions around town, Bill will know about it. And I'll do more research," Emma added. "See if I can find information about who might have stolen the fish in the first place, what their motivations might have been." They worked with quiet efficiency, turning their kitchen into a strategy room. Emma printed out maps of the area around Cedar Lake, marking potential observation points and escape routes. Hank called Bill Hendricks, who confirmed that several unfamiliar faces had been asking questions around town. Men in expensive suits, claiming to be insurance investigators looking into an environmental incident at the lake. "Told them I hadn't heard about any incident," Bill reported, "but they seemed mighty interested in who's been fishing where lately. Asked specifically about the Morrison place. The information confirmed their fears while also providing useful intelligence. These weren't random criminals. They were organized, well-funded, and specifically targeting their location. But they were also operating under false pretenses, which suggested they weren't working with official authority." By afternoon, Emma had constructed a timeline of events surrounding the original theft. The fish had been taken during a late-night break-in at the research facility, along with several other specimens and research files. The thieves had known exactly what they were looking for and how to care for it during transport. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was industrial espionage. "Look at this," Emma said, pointing to an article from a trade publication. 3 weeks before the theft, there was a bidding war between 2 pharmaceutical companies for the rights to Dr. Vasquez's bioremediation research. The institute turned them both down, saying the research wasn't ready for commercial application, so someone decided to steal it instead of waiting," Hank concluded. "And now they want their investment back." The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture that was both clearer and more frightening than their original assumptions. They weren't just dealing with common thieves. They were caught between competing forces, all of whom saw the fish as valuable property rather than a living creature deserving of care and protection. As evening approached, the dark sedan remained in its position across the lake. Hank found himself checking the windows every few minutes, his protective instincts on high alert. Emma had grown quiet and thoughtful, occasionally making notes in her research journal, but spending more time simply watching their golden guest. "Dad," she said as they prepared dinner, "what if we're wrong about Dr. Vasquez? What if she's working with these people?" The question had been nagging at Hank as well. Their phone conversation had felt genuine, but people could be very convincing. When millions of dollars were at stake, they had only Dr. Vasquez's word that she cared more about the fish's welfare than its commercial value. "Then we'll deal with that too," he said. "But until we have evidence otherwise, we proceed as if she's trustworthy. Sometimes you have to take a leap of faith." Outside, darkness was settling over Cedar Lake, and the watchers across the shore made no move to leave. Whatever happened next, Hank knew their quiet life was truly over. The only question now was whether they could navigate the dangerous currents ahead without losing everything they'd worked to rebuild since Sarah's death. A deep, anonymous letter crinkled in his pocket as he moved around the kitchen. A constant reminder that they were no longer observers of their own story. They had become active participants in something much larger and more dangerous than they'd ever imagined. That night, sleep came in fitful fragments. Hank dozed in his recliner, positioned where he could see both the kitchen and the front windows, while Emma had moved her mattress to the living room floor, claiming she felt safer sleeping near her father. Every small sound, the settling of old wood, the gentle lapping of lake water against their dock, the distant call of a night bird, had them both instantly alert. It was during one of these wakeful periods, sometime after midnight, that Hank found himself drawn to the bedroom he'd once shared with Sarah. The room remained largely unchanged since her passing, preserved not as a shrine, but as a repository of memories too precious to disturb. Her reading glasses still sat on the nightstand, beside a bookmark-marked novel she'd never finished. Her favorite sweater hung in the closet, still carrying the faint scent of her lavender perfume. On the dresser, the small wooden jewelry box seemed to glow in the moonlight streaming through the curtains. Hank opened it with reverent care, revealing Sarah's wedding ring, nestled in its bed of faded velvet. But tonight, his attention was drawn to something else, a leather-bound journal he'd discovered weeks after her funeral, tucked beneath her collection of scarves. He'd read it only once, shortly after finding it, and the intimacy of Sarah's private thoughts had felt like an intrusion even after her death. But now, faced with impossible decisions and moral complexities that seemed beyond his ability to navigate alone, he found himself desperate for her guidance. The journal fell open to an entry dated 2 months before her diagnosis, when their biggest worries had been Emma's high school choices and whether they could afford a new roof before winter. "I've been thinking about the parable of the talents lately, not the religious interpretation, but the deeper meaning about stewardship. We're all given gifts, opportunities, moments when we can choose to do something meaningful or just play it safe. Hank sometimes holds back when he should push forward, too worried about making the wrong choice to make any choice at all. But I think the real sin isn't making mistakes, it's wasting the chances we're given to make a difference." The words seemed to speak directly to their current situation. Sarah had always been the bolder of the two of them, the one who encouraged calculated risks and principled stands. She would have seen the appearance of the golden fish not as a burden, but as an opportunity, a chance to do something significant. Another entry, written during her treatment, offered even more pointed guidance. When you know something is right, you have to act on that knowledge, even when, especially when, it's inconvenient or frightening. I used to worry about protecting Emma from the harder truths of life, but I've realized that the greatest gift we can give our children is the example of adults who make difficult decisions based on principles rather than fear. Hank closed the journal with hands that shook slightly, not from uncertainty, but from the clarity that Sarah's words had provided. She was right, as she'd always been. They had been given something extraordinary, and with it came the responsibility to use that gift wisely, not just for themselves, but for something larger. He returned to the living room to find Emma awake, staring at the ceiling with the wide-eyed intensity of someone whose mind refused to rest. "Dad, I've been thinking about something." "What's that, sweetheart?" "The fish has been with us for 8 days now, and it's thriving. It's eating local food, adapting to our water conditions, showing no signs of stress or illness. What if Dr. Vasquez is wrong about it needing specialized care?" The observation was astute and troubling. If the fish could survive and thrive in natural conditions, it raised questions about why Dr. Vasquez believed otherwise. Either she was mistaken about her own creation's requirements, or she was being deliberately misleading about them. "What if," Emma continued, "the fish is happier and healthier in a natural environment than it ever was in a laboratory? What if returning it to proper care means condemning it to a life of captivity and experimentation?" The possibility had occurred to Hank as well, though he'd tried to push it aside. Looking at their golden guest now, swimming with apparent contentment in its makeshift home, he had to admit that it showed no signs of distress or deterioration. If anything, it seemed more vibrant and active than the descriptions in the research articles suggested. "There's something else," Emma said, pulling herself up to sit cross-legged on her mattress. "I've been reading more about bioremediation and genetic engineering. The techniques Dr. Vasquez used, they're not just about cleaning pollutants. They're about creating organisms that can survive and reproduce in damaged environments. The fish isn't just a tool for environmental cleanup. It's potentially the first of a new breed designed to populate and restore damaged ecosystems. The implication sent a chill through Hank's mind. If Emma was right, their fish wasn't just a valuable research. It was a prototype for environmental restoration on a massive scale. No wonder various parties were so desperate to reclaim it. But that makes it even more important to protect it, Emma concluded. If this fish could help restore damaged lakes and rivers all over the world, we can't let it fall into the wrong hands. We can't let it become someone's private property to be exploited for profit. Her reasoning was sound, her passion evident, but Hank felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. They were no longer just protecting a valuable specimen, they were potentially safeguarding the future of environmental restoration efforts worldwide. What are you suggesting we do? Emma took a deep breath, her expression showing the kind of determined resolve that reminded him powerfully of Sarah. I think we should take the fish back to the lake, not to hide it or release it randomly, but to find the perfect habitat where it can live freely and maybe even reproduce naturally. Let it do what it was designed to do, not in a laboratory, but in the real world where it can make a genuine difference. The plan was bold, idealistic, and fraught with risk. It would mean abandoning any claim to financial reward. It would mean potentially opposing not just the mysterious watchers, but also Dr. Vasquez and the Research Institute. It would mean taking responsibility for decisions that could have global environmental implications. But as Hank looked at his daughter, this remarkable young woman who had inherited her mother's wisdom and her grandfather's principles, he felt a surge of pride that overwhelmed his fears. Your mother would have loved this plan, he said quietly. You think so? I know so. She always believed that when you're given something special, your job isn't to hoard it, but to share it with the world in the way that does the most good. Emma's smile was radiant, transforming her face from that of a worried teenager to that of a young adult ready to take on the world. So we do it. We take the fish back to the lake and let it choose its own future. Hank nodded, feeling a sense of rightness settle into his bones. We do it. But we do it smart, and we do it safe. Those people watching us, we need to deal with them first. Outside, the dark sedan remained at its post, its occupants no doubt unaware that their surveillance had helped push the Morrison family toward a decision that would change everything. The anonymous letter in Hank's pocket no longer felt like a threat. It felt like confirmation that they were on the right path, that their choice mattered enough to inspire both fear and desperate action from those who would exploit what they sought to protect. The golden fish continued its peaceful swimming, unaware that its fate was being decided by two humans who had chosen principle over profit, environmental stewardship over personal gain. In the quiet hours before dawn, a father and daughter finalized their plan to give the world a gift that might help heal waters damaged by generations of carelessness and greed. The call came at 7:30 the next morning, just as Hank was preparing breakfast, and Emma was updating her research notes. The phone's sharp ring cut through the cabin's peaceful atmosphere like an alarm, and both of them froze, staring at the device as if it might explode. Mr. Morrison? The voice was familiar, Dr. Elena Vasquez, but her tone was different now, urgent and strained. I need to speak with you immediately. It's about our conversation yesterday, and I'm afraid there are some things I wasn't entirely truthful about. Hank's stomach dropped. Dr. Vasquez, what do you mean? I can't discuss this over the phone. There are people who monitor communications related to Project Aureus. Can we meet in person? I'm in Cedar Falls right now. I drove up last night. There's a diner on Main Street called Maggie's. Can you meet me there in 30 minutes? The request sent alarm bells ringing in Hank's mind. Dr. Vasquez's sudden appearance in their small town, combined with the mysterious watchers and threatening letter, felt like more than coincidence. But her voice carried genuine urgency. And if she was willing to risk an in-person meeting, perhaps she had crucial information they needed. "I'll be there," he said. "Come alone," Dr. Vasquez added quickly. "And Mr. Morrison, if you have found something unusual in your lake, please don't do anything with it until we've talked. There are forces at work here that are more dangerous than you can imagine." The line went dead, leaving Hank staring at the phone while Emma watched his face for clues about what they'd just heard. "She's here," he said. "In town. She wants to meet." "It could be a trap," Emma said immediately. "Those people watching us. What if they got to her? What if they forced her to call you?" The possibility had occurred to Hank as well, but something in Dr. Vasquez's voice suggested genuine distress rather than coercion. Still, he wasn't about to walk blindly into potential danger. "You're staying here," he said. "Keep the doors locked, and if I'm not back in 2 hours, call Bill Hendricks and then the sheriff." "Dad, no arguments, Emma. If something goes wrong, I need to know you're safe." 25 minutes later, Hank parked his truck outside Maggie's diner, the same establishment where he and Sarah had shared their first date 24 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. Another life-changing conversation about to unfold in the place where his adult life had truly begun. Dr. Elena Vasquez was smaller than he'd imagined. A compact woman in her early 40s with prematurely grey hair and intelligent eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of their surroundings. She'd chosen a corner booth with clear sightlines to both entrances and her hands wrapped around a coffee cup with the defensive grip of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming," she said as he approached. "Please sit. We don't have much time." Hank slid into the booth across from her, noting the thick manila folder beside her elbow and the way her eyes constantly flicked toward the windows. "Dr. Vasquez, what's this about? Yesterday you seemed—" "Yesterday I was lying," she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not about caring for the fish. That part was completely true. But about almost everything else." She opened the manila folder, revealing photographs, documents, and what looked like internal communications. "Mr. Morrison, I didn't lose Project Aureus to thieves. I stole it myself." The words hit Hank like a physical blow. Everything they'd assumed about the situation, every decision they'd made based on the information available to them, suddenly shifted into a new and alarming configuration. "I don't understand," he managed. Dr. Vasquez pulled out a photograph showing the golden fish in what was obviously a laboratory setting, surrounded by monitoring equipment and glass tanks. 5 years of my life went into creating Aureus, but not for the reasons the Institute claimed publicly. They told everyone it was for environmental remediation, and that part was true. But they had other plans. Plans I only discovered 3 weeks before the supposed theft. She slid several documents across the table. Internal memos, budget allocations, meeting minutes, all bearing the letterhead of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, the same company Emma had identified in her research as one of the unsuccessful bidders for the bioremediation rights. Meridian had a secret contract with the Institute, Dr. Vasquez continued. They were going to dissect Aureus to reverse engineer the genetic modifications, then mass-produce modified organisms for military applications. Biological weapons disguised as environmental cleanup tools. Hank felt sick. The beautiful creature swimming peacefully in their kitchen, the living symbol of hope and environmental healing, had been destined for weaponization by corporate interests that saw profit in destruction. "So I took it," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "During a supposed security breach that I orchestrated myself. I created false documentation about the theft, established a fake reward fund to make the story believable, and released Aureus into the wild, where I hoped it would have a chance to live freely and maybe even reproduce naturally. But why not just expose the military contract? Why not go public with what you'd discovered?" Dr. Vasquez's laugh was bitter. With what proof? Corporate lawyers had structured everything to appear legitimate. Meridian's public face was all about environmental restoration. They would have claimed any military applications were purely theoretical, just preparatory research in case of bioterrorism threats. And meanwhile, they would have taken my life's work and turned it into an instrument of death. The truth was staggering in its implications. Dr. Vasquez wasn't just a concerned scientist. She was a whistleblower who had sacrificed her career and reputation to prevent her creation from being perverted into a weapon. "Mr. Morrison," she said, leaning forward with desperate intensity, "yesterday when you called, something in your voice made me believe you might have actually found Aureus. The questions you asked, the specific details you mentioned about water, conditions and feeding patterns, they were too precise to be hypothetical." Hank met her gaze steadily, weighing trust against caution. "What makes you think that?" "Because Meridian has been monitoring communications about Project Aureus for over a year. They have algorithms scanning for specific keywords, voice recognition, software analyzing calls to my work number, satellite surveillance of water bodies where the fish might have been released. Yesterday's call triggered their systems. The revelation explained the anonymous letter, the watchers across the lake, the sudden escalation of interest in their quiet corner of Colorado. Their innocent phone call had inadvertently announced their discovery to the very people Dr. Vasquez had been trying to evade. "They're not just looking for the fish anymore," Dr. Vasquez continued. "They're looking for me, and now they know I'm here, talking to you, which means we're both in danger." She pulled out additional documents, surveillance photos that made Hank's blood run cold, images of their cabin taken with telephoto lenses, shots of Emma walking to their mailbox, pictures of Hank at his various job sites around town. Meridian had been watching them for days, cataloging their routines and vulnerabilities. "Mr. Morrison, if you have found Aureus, you cannot let them take it. What they would do with it, the applications they have planned, it would be an environmental catastrophe disguised as progress. Millions of people could die from weaponized organisms designed to look like beneficial bacteria." The weight of responsibility that had been building over the past week suddenly increased tenfold. They weren't just protecting a valuable research specimen. They were potentially preventing biological warfare on a global scale. "What do you want from me?" Hank asked. "Help me save my creation. If Aureus is alive and thriving in Cedar Lake, then my sacrifice wasn't in vain. But we need to protect it from Meridian, and we need to document its success so that someday, when it's safe, the beneficial applications can be pursued by ethical researchers." Dr. Vasquez reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "Mr. Morrison, I know this is more than you bargained for when you made that phone call, but I believe you're a good man who wants to do the right thing. And right now, the right thing is helping me keep a weapon of mass destruction disguised as a golden fish out of the hands of people who would use it to kill rather than heal." Hank looked into her eyes and saw the same desperate love for the fish that he'd come to feel, the same protective instinct that had driven Emma's research and his own sleepless nights. Dr. Elena Vasquez wasn't the enemy. She was an ally who had risked everything to prevent her life's work from becoming an instrument of death. "Dr. Vasquez," he said quietly, "I think it's time you met my daughter, and I think it's time you saw what we've been protecting." Her eyes filled with tears of relief and hope as she gathered her documents and prepared to follow him home to a reunion that had been over a year in the making. A scientist and her creation, brought together by the moral courage of a father and daughter who had chosen to do what was right rather than what was profitable. The reunion between Dr. Vasquez and her creation was everything Hank had hoped it would be, and more heartbreaking than he'd expected. The moment she saw the golden fish swimming peacefully in their makeshift home, her composure crumbled entirely. She knelt beside the mixing bowl with tears streaming down her face, her hands hovering just above the water's surface as if she were afraid to disturb a dream. "Hello, beautiful," she whispered. "I'm so sorry it took me so long to find you." The fish seemed to recognize her voice, swimming directly to where her hands cast shadows on the water and performing the same graceful pirouette that had mesmerized Hank and Emma so many times over the past week. For several minutes, none of them spoke, content to witness this moment of connection between creator and creation. Emma broke the silence first, her scientific curiosity overcoming the emotional weight of the scene. Dr. Vasquez, how can you be sure it's the same fish? Are there identifying markers we can't see? Dr. Vasquez wiped her eyes and pointed to a barely visible pattern near the fish's dorsal fin. See that constellation of darker scales? That's unique to Aureus. It developed during the genetic modification process, not something we planned, but a beautiful accident that became his signature. She looked up at Emma with genuine admiration. You've taken excellent care of him. His coloring is more vibrant than I've ever seen it, and his behavior suggests perfect health. He's been eating local insects and algae, Emma said proudly. No special food or supplements needed. That's exactly what I hoped would happen. The modifications were designed to make him adaptable, self-sufficient. Dr. Vasquez stood slowly, her expression shifting from wonder to urgent concern. But we can't celebrate for long. Meridian's security team arrived in town this morning. 3 black SUVs, professional operators with surveillance equipment. They're setting up a perimeter around the lake. Hank moved to the window and peered through the curtains. The dark sedan was still there, but now it had company. 2 additional vehicles positioned at strategic points around the lake's perimeter. How long do we have? Hours, maybe less. They're waiting for something. Probably confirmation that we actually have. Aureus, or orders from their corporate handlers about how to proceed. Dr. Vasquez joined him at the window. But Mr. Morrison, there's something else you need to know, something that changes everything. She returned to her manila folder and pulled out a document that looked like a genetic analysis report. I've been monitoring water quality in lakes throughout Colorado for the past year, looking for any sign that Aureus was surviving in the wild. 3 weeks ago, I got results from Cedar Lake that made me realize how successful my experiment really was. Emma leaned forward eagerly. What did you find? Heavy metal concentrations in your lake have dropped by 60% over the past 8 months. Nitrogen levels from agricultural runoff have been reduced by 40%. The water clarity has improved dramatically. Dr. Vasquez's voice carried the excitement of a scientist witnessing her life's work succeeding beyond her wildest dreams. Aureus isn't just surviving. He's doing exactly what he was designed to do. He's healing this ecosystem. The implications were staggering. Their golden fish wasn't just a valuable specimen. It was an active environmental restoration system, quietly cleaning the water they depended on for drinking, fishing, and recreation. But there's more, Dr. Vasquez continued. The genetic modifications I made were designed to be inheritable. If Aureus finds a compatible mate among the local fish population, his offspring would carry the same bioremediation capabilities. We could be looking at the natural establishment of a population that could clean and maintain water quality indefinitely. Emma's eyes widened. You mean he could reproduce? Create more fish like himself? It's possible. The modifications are stable, and I designed them to integrate with natural genetic material. It would take several generations to establish a sustainable population. But yes, theoretically, Aureus could be the ancestor of an entire species dedicated to environmental restoration. Hank felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on his shoulders. They weren't just protecting one fish, they were potentially safeguarding the future of water restoration efforts worldwide. The creature swimming peacefully in their kitchen could be the key to healing damaged ecosystems across the planet. That's why we can't let Meridian take him, Dr. Vasquez said with fierce determination. They don't just want to weaponize the technology, they want to control it, patent it, make sure that environmental restoration can only happen on their terms, at their prices, with their permission. The boat motor in Hank's small storage shed suddenly seemed like more than just a means of transportation. It was their tool for ensuring that environmental healing remained a public good rather than corporate property. The old but reliable outboard had served 3 generations of Morrisons, carrying them across Cedar Lake for fishing, exploration, and the quiet contemplation that only came with being surrounded by natural beauty. "We need to take him to the deep water," Hank said, the plan crystallizing in his mind. "Tonight, when it's dark, find the perfect habitat where he can establish a territory and maybe even attract a mate. The deepest part of the lake is about 3 miles northeast of here," Emma added, consulting a topographical map she'd printed from her research. "Rocky bottom, good cover, plenty of natural food sources. It's where the old mining operation was. The water there has exactly the kind of heavy metal contamination that Aureus was designed to process." Dr. Vasquez nodded approvingly. "That sounds ideal, but we'll need to be careful about the transition. Even though he's thriving in your bowl, moving him to such a large body of water could be stressful." "I've been thinking about that," Emma said. "What if we don't just release him? What if we stay with him for a while, make sure he's comfortable and safe before we leave him on his own?" The suggestion touched Hank deeply. Even in the midst of planning what might be a dangerous mission, his daughter was thinking about the emotional welfare of their golden guest. Sarah would have been proud of the young woman Emma was becoming. Someone who combined scientific thinking with genuine compassion. As the afternoon wore on, they refined their plan with the methodical care of people who understood that failure might have global consequences. Dr. Vasquez provided technical guidance about water chemistry and fish behavior. Emma contributed detailed knowledge of the lake's geography and ecosystem. Hank offered practical wisdom about navigation, weather patterns, and the logistics of moving quietly across water at night. The boat motor would carry them to their destination, but they would paddle the final distance to avoid noise that might alert the surveillance teams. They would use Hank's headlamp to illuminate their work while maintaining minimal visibility from shore. Most importantly, they would document everything: water samples, photographs, GPS coordinates, creating a record that could be shared with ethical researchers in the future. As evening approached, Dr. Vasquez made a confession that added another layer of complexity to their mission. "I need you to know that if we're caught, I'll take full responsibility. I'll tell them I coerced you into helping me. I won't let your family suffer for my choices." "That's not how the Morrison family works," Hank replied firmly. "We're in this together by choice. All 3 of us." Emma nodded emphatically. "Besides, someone needs to witness what happens. If this works, if Aureus successfully establishes himself in the wild, the world needs to know that environmental restoration doesn't have to be controlled by corporations." The golden fish continued its peaceful swimming, occasionally surfacing to examine its 3 guardians with what looked remarkably like trust. As darkness fell over Cedar Lake, the surveillance teams maintained their positions, unaware that the family they were watching had already committed to a course of action that would determine the future of environmental science. Hank checked his boat motor one final time, ensuring that the old but reliable engine would perform when they needed it most. The motor had never failed him in 20 years of use, carrying him through storms and calm seas alike, always bringing him safely home. Tonight, it would carry them toward the most important destination of their lives, a place where science and nature could merge in the service of healing rather than destruction. The cabin filled with the quiet tension of people preparing for a mission that could change the world or cost them everything they held dear. But looking around at his daughter and their unexpected ally, Hank felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. The unshakable conviction that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. Outside, Cedar Lake waited in the darkness, its deep waters ready to receive a gift that could heal not just this one ecosystem, but potentially every damaged body of water on Earth. The surveillance teams watched and waited, but they had no idea that their quarry was about to slip away into the night, carrying hope and healing into the depths where it belonged. Midnight came with a stillness that felt heavy with possibility. The surveillance teams had maintained their positions throughout the evening, but their attention seemed focused on the cabin's lit windows rather than the small dock behind it, where Hank's boat waited in the shadows. They moved with the careful precision of people who understood that every sound could betray them. Emma carried the transport container, a larger aerated cooler that Dr. Vasquez had retrieved from her rental car, while Hank shouldered the small bag containing their documentation supplies and emergency gear. Dr. Vasquez followed with her scientific equipment, instruments that would help them assess the water conditions at their destination and ensure Aureus had the best possible chance of thriving. The transfer from mixing bowl to transport container went smoothly, the golden fish showing no signs of distress as it explored its new temporary home. In the beam of Hank's headlamp, Aureus gleamed like a living treasure, its scales catching and reflecting the light in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. "He's beautiful," Dr. Vasquez whispered, her voice thick with emotion, even more so than I remembered. The boat motor started on the first pull, its familiar rumble muffled by the careful modifications Hank had made earlier in the day. Strips of rubber around the housing to dampen vibration, exhaust redirected below the waterline to minimize noise. 20 years of faithful service had taught him exactly how to coax maximum performance from minimum sound. They moved slowly at first, following the shoreline where the shadows were deepest and the surveillance team's sightlines were most obscured. Emma sat in the bow with her hand on the transport container, monitoring their precious cargo while serving as their lookout for obstacles in the dark water. The headlamp around Hank's forehead provided just enough illumination to navigate safely, without creating a beacon visible from shore. Its steady beam cut through the darkness ahead, revealing the familiar landmarks that had guided his nighttime fishing expeditions for decades. Tonight, that intimate knowledge of Cedar Lake's geography was serving a purpose far greater than catching dinner. "How's he doing?" Dr. Vasquez asked, her voice barely audible over the motor's quiet purr. Emma peered into the container. "Still swimming normally. The movement doesn't seem to bother him at all." They were halfway to their destination when Emma's sharp intake of breath made both adults instantly alert. "Dad, there are lights behind us, moving lights." Hank turned to see 3 powerful searchlights sweeping across the water from different positions around the lake. The surveillance teams had finally realized their quarry was no longer in the cabin, and they were mounting a coordinated search effort. "How long until we reach the deep water?" Dr. Vasquez asked, her scientific calm masking what Hank suspected was considerable fear. 10 more minutes at this speed," Hank replied. "But if we go faster, we'll make more noise and disturb the fish." The dilemma was immediate and crucial. Speed might help them evade the search teams, but it could also stress Aureus to the point where the transfer became dangerous or even fatal. Emma made the decision for all of them. "We stick to the plan," she said firmly. "Aureus's welfare comes first." We knew this might happen. Her mature reasoning in the face of danger made Hank's chest swell with pride. At 16, his daughter was displaying the kind of principled courage that defined true character, the willingness to accept personal risk in service of something greater than herself. The searchlights were getting closer, their beams sweeping in systematic patterns that suggested professional training and coordination. These weren't local law enforcement officers stumbling around in the dark. They were experienced operators with sophisticated equipment and clear objectives. "There," Emma said, pointing ahead to where the lake's surface showed the subtle change in color that indicated significantly deeper water. "That's the area we mapped." Dr. Vasquez checked her instruments. "Water temperature is perfect, pH levels are ideal, and the heavy metal concentrations are exactly what Aureus was designed to process. This is going to work." They cut the motor, and drifted into the deep water zone, the sudden silence making every small sound seem amplified. The gentle lapping of water against the boat's hull, the soft whisper of Emma's breathing, the quiet hum of Dr. Vasquez's monitoring equipment, all of it seemed incredibly loud in the darkness. Hank's headlamp illuminated the transport container. As they prepared for the moment they'd been planning for hours, the golden fish swam calmly in its temporary home, seemingly unaware that it was about to be granted the freedom its creator had always intended for it. "Before we do this," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice heavy with significance, "I need you both to understand what we're about to accomplish. We're not just releasing a fish, we're giving the world a chance to heal itself. Every drop of water that Aureus cleans, every toxin it neutralizes, every offspring it produces that carries these same capabilities, all of it serves the cause of environmental restoration." The headlamp's beam seemed to intensify as she spoke, transforming their simple flashlight into a symbol of hope illuminating the darkness. In that light, they could see their mission clearly, not as theft or deception, but as an act of environmental stewardship that honored the best impulses of human ingenuity and compassion. The searchlights behind them were getting closer, but ahead lay the deep, clean water where Aureus could fulfill its destiny. The moment of release was approaching, and with it would come either triumph or capture. But whatever happened, they would meet it together, united in their commitment to choosing environmental healing over corporate profit. The moment arrived. With a weight that seemed to bend the very air around them, Dr. Vasquez knelt at the side of the boat, her hands supporting the transport container as Emma carefully tilted it toward the lake's dark surface. In the beam of Hank's headlamp, the water looked like black glass, perfect and undisturbed. "Goodbye, beautiful," Dr. Vasquez whispered as the container met the water. "Live free." The golden fish paused at the boundary between captivity and freedom, as if sensing the magnitude of the moment. For several heartbeats, it remained motionless, suspended between two worlds. Then, with a movement so graceful, it took Hank's breath. Away, Aureus slipped from the container into Cedar Lake's welcoming depths. The transformation was immediate and magical. The fish that had seemed magnificent in their kitchen mixing bowl became something transcendent in its natural element. Its golden scales caught and amplified the headlamp's beam, creating cascades of light that rippled outward like liquid sunshine. It dove once, testing the depths, then surfaced near the boat as if offering a final farewell to its protectors. Emma's sharp cry of wonder was cut short by the harsh glare of searchlights suddenly illuminating their position. 3 boats had approached under cover of darkness, their powerful engines now roaring to life as they converged on the Morrison family's location. "This is a private security operation," a voice boomed across the water through a megaphone. "You are interfering with the recovery of stolen corporate property. Surrender immediately." Dr. Vasquez stood up in their small boat, her slight frame somehow commanding in the harsh light. "My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I am the creator of Project Aureus. What you call stolen property, I call a living creature that deserves freedom." The lead boat drew alongside theirs, and Hank found himself staring at 3 men in tactical gear whose faces showed the cold professionalism of corporate security contractors. The leader, a man with graying temples and calculating eyes, spoke without emotion. "Dr. Vasquez, you are in violation of multiple federal statutes and corporate contracts. The genetic material you removed from Meridian's facility represents millions of dollars in research investment." "Meridian never owned Aureus," Dr. Vasquez replied firmly. "The research was conducted under government grants at an independent institute. Meridian's involvement was unauthorized and illegal. That will be determined by the courts. Right now, we need you to surrender the specimen." Emma looked down into the water where the golden fish had disappeared, then back at the security team with defiant courage that reminded Hank powerfully of Sarah. "What specimen? I don't see any specimen." The lead contractor's expression darkened. "We have thermal imaging equipment that tracked your approach to this location. We know you released something into the water. Our divers will recover it." "Good luck with that," Emma said with a slight smile. "This lake is over 300 feet deep in some places, with underwater caves, fallen trees, and rocky overhangs. Even if your divers could work safely at night in these conditions, do you really think one fish is going to wait around to be caught?" As if summoned by her words, a flash of gold appeared in the distance, far beyond the reach of the searchlights. Aureus, already exploring his new territory, already beginning the work of environmental restoration that would define his species. For generations to come, the lead contractor activated a handheld device, speaking rapidly into it. "Base, this is Alpha Team. Subjects released the asset into deep water, requesting immediate deployment of containment nets and underwater recovery equipment." "That's going to take hours to organize," Dr. Vasquez observed calmly. "And by then, Aureus will be miles away, adapting to local conditions and beginning his real work." The contractor's jaw tightened. "Dr. Vasquez, you've made a very expensive mistake. Meridian Corporation has invested too much in this project to let it simply swim away." "Then, Meridian Corporation should have invested in environmental healing instead of biological weapons," she replied without flinching. In the water below, something extraordinary was beginning to happen. The golden light that had marked Aureus's presence was spreading, not moving away, but expanding outward in gentle pulses. Other fish were being drawn to the light, local species investigating this newcomer to their ecosystem. Emma pointed excitedly. "Look, he's already making contact with the native population." The sight was breathtaking. Dozens of ordinary lakefish swimming in formation around the golden beacon of Aureus, as if recognizing instinctively that this strange newcomer represented something beneficial for their shared home. As they watched, a single scale detached from Aureus and floated toward the surface, catching the light like a tiny golden coin. Emma reached out and caught it in her palm, where it continued to gleam with an inner radiance that seemed almost alive. "The genetic modifications are stable and transferable," Dr. Vasquez said with wonder. "This is better than I dared hope. He's not just going to survive, he's going to thrive and share his gifts with future generations." The golden scale in Emma's hand represented everything they'd fought to protect: beauty, hope, the possibility of environmental healing, and the triumph of principled action over corporate greed, whatever consequences they faced for their actions. Tonight, they had succeeded in giving the world something precious and irreplaceable. The contractor was barking orders into his radio, coordinating a recovery effort that would ultimately prove futile. But in the deep, clean water of Cedar Lake, Aureus swam free, carrying the promise of restoration to waters that had waited too long for healing. 3 months later, on a crisp October morning that painted Cedar Lake in shades of gold and crimson, Hank Morrison stood on his dock holding a gift that would have seemed impossible just a few seasons ago. A new fishing rod, modest but well-crafted, with a card that read, "Happy 59th birthday, Dad. Here's to catching the right things. Love, Emma." The legal complications had resolved more favorably than anyone had dared hope. Dr. Vasquez's documentation of Meridian's illegal weapons research had triggered a federal investigation that ultimately vindicated their actions. The pharmaceutical company faced massive fines and congressional hearings, while the Rocky Mountain Marine Research Institute received increased funding to continue ethical bioremediation projects. Emma had been right about the lake's depth and complexity confounding the recovery efforts. Despite weeks of searching with increasingly sophisticated equipment, Meridian's contractors had found no trace of Aureus. The fish had vanished into the ecosystem as completely as if it had never existed, except for the steadily improving water. Quality measurements that Dr. Vasquez continued to monitor with growing excitement. "He's not just surviving," she had told them during her most recent visit. He's transforming the entire lake. Heavy metal concentrations are down 75% from last spring. The water clarity is better than it's been in 30 years. And we're starting to see signs that suggest he may have found compatible genetic material among the local fish population. The possibility of a naturally occurring population of bioremediation fish was beyond anything they'd imagined that first night when Hank had brought home his impossible catch. What had begun as a desperate attempt to put food on the table had evolved into a conservation success story that was being studied by environmental scientists around the world. Emma's scholarship to Colorado State University's marine biology program had materialized through Dr. Vasquez's foundation, funding that would cover not just tuition, but living expenses and research opportunities that would have been unimaginable before their golden fish had entered their lives. She would leave for college in the spring, but not before helping Dr. Vasquez establish a permanent research station on Cedar Lake to monitor the long-term environmental impact of Project Aureus. I keep thinking Mom would have loved seeing how this all turned out, Emma said, joining her father on the dock with 2 steaming cups of coffee, a morning ritual they'd maintained throughout all the changes and upheavals. Hank accepted his cup gratefully, inhaling the familiar aroma that somehow made every morning feel manageable, regardless of what challenges it might bring. She would have been proud of you. The way you handled yourself that night on the lake, standing up to those corporate security people, that took real courage. I learned it from watching you, Emma replied simply, and from reading her journal. She was right about taking chances when you know something is worth fighting for. The community of Cedar Falls had embraced their story with the kind of quiet pride that small towns reserve for neighbors who do extraordinary things without seeking credit or recognition. Bill Hendricks had created an informal display at the hardware store showcasing newspaper clippings about the environmental restoration project, while Mrs. Patterson had appointed herself the unofficial tour guide for the occasional visiting. Researchers who came to study their famous lake, Hank's handyman business, had grown through word-of-mouth referrals from people who respected his principled stand during the controversy. He found himself working on more interesting projects, solar panel installations, energy-efficient home modifications, and even some consulting work with environmental groups looking to implement sustainable practices in rural communities. 2. Financial security that had seemed so important during those first desperate days after discovering the fish had arrived through honest work and community respect rather than through selling something that belonged to the world. The irony wasn't lost on either of them that their refusal to profit from Aureus had ultimately led to the kind of prosperity that Sarah had always dreamed of, enough to live comfortably without compromising their values. Ready to see if there are any regular fish left in this lake? Emma asked, nodding toward her father's birthday present. Hank strung his new fishing rod with the careful attention to detail that his father had taught him decades ago. The equipment was simple but well made, designed for function rather than flash, exactly the kind of tool that Hank Morrison would have approved of. They cast their lines into water that sparkled with unusual clarity in the morning sun. And within minutes, Emma had hooked a beautiful rainbow trout that fought with the vigor of a fish, living in exceptionally clean conditions. "Look at that," she said as she carefully released the trout back into the lake. "His colors are incredible. I've never seen local fish looking so healthy." As if summoned by their conversation, a flash of gold appeared in the deeper water beyond. Their dock, too distant to see clearly, but unmistakably familiar to anyone who had spent time caring for the world's most famous genetically modified fish. "He's still here," Hank said with quiet satisfaction. "Still doing his work. And he's not alone," Emma added, pointing to several other shapes moving through the water near the golden gleam. "Dr. Vasquez was right about genetic compatibility. Look how many fish are schooling with him." The sight filled Hank with a contentment that had nothing to do with financial success or public recognition, and everything to do with the knowledge that they had chosen correctly when faced with an impossible decision. They had protected something beautiful and important, given it the freedom to fulfill its purpose, and trusted that doing the right thing would somehow lead to right outcomes. The new fishing rod felt perfect in his hands, balanced, responsive, ready for whatever the lake might offer. As they settled in for a morning of fishing in water that grew cleaner every day, Hank Morrison reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment of peace and possibility. Sometimes the most valuable things you can catch are the ones you choose to set free. Sometimes the greatest wealth comes not from what you keep, but from what you give away. And sometimes a father and daughter fishing together on a quiet lake can change the world simply by refusing to let greed triumph over love. The golden scale that Emma had caught that dramatic night remained pressed between the pages of Sarah's journal, a reminder that beauty and wonder could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. But the real treasure was sitting beside him on the dock, preparing to embark on her own journey of discovery and purpose, carrying forward the values that had guided 3 generations of Morrisons through triumph and loss alike. Cedar Lake stretched before them, its depths holding secrets of healing and hope that would benefit generations yet to come. And on its shores, a father and daughter continued the ancient ritual of fishing, now understanding that the most important catches were the ones measured not in size or value, but in the legacy they left for the world.